So, what if I told you that the Bible's most famous villain was never the villain at all? Today, we are diving deep into a radical reinterpretation of Genesis, one that uncovers a 2,000-year-old mystery, a mystery that suggests the story of the serpent is actually the story of the Messiah in disguise.
I mean, we all know the story we were taught, right? The serpent in the Garden of Eden, he's the ultimate bad guy, the deceiver who leads humanity to its fall from grace. It's always presented as this really simple, straightforward case of good versus evil. But the biblical text itself tells a very, very different story.
What if that whole traditional reading is just profoundly wrong? What if the text is telling a completely different story, one that's been hiding in plain sight for thousands of years? Well, that is exactly the puzzle we're about to unlock.
Now, our investigation doesn't actually start in the Garden of Eden. It starts thousands of years later with a single, really puzzling statement from Jesus himself.
He says this to Nicodemus, and he directly compares his own crucifixion, the central act of salvation, to a moment in Israel's history when Moses lifted up a bronze serpent to heal the people.
And this is the contradiction that just shatters the traditional narrative. I mean, think about it. Why would the Messiah compare his own life-saving sacrifice to a symbol of pure evil? It makes absolutely no sense, unless, of course, our entire understanding of the serpent is just wrong.
So to solve this, we have to go back, way back, to the beginning, to Genesis 3, and read what the text actually says, not what we've been told it says for centuries.
Okay, so we're always told the serpent is evil, but the Bible never actually says that. The Hebrew word it uses is arum. Now that word doesn't mean wicked or evil. Throughout the rest of the Old Testament, it's translated as wise, perceptive, or shrewd. It's a term for wisdom, not a moral judgment.
And what about the famous lie? The serpent says, "You will not surely die." Now, remember God's command, "In the day you eat of it, you shall surely die." But did they? Adam went on to live for another 930 years. He didn't die that day, at least not physically. The serpent wasn't lying. It was actually pointing out a paradox in God's own command.
And get this. Every other thing the serpent says is explicitly confirmed as true by the text itself just a few verses later. It said their eyes would be opened, and they were. It said they would become like God, knowing good and evil. And then God himself says, "Hey, the man has become like one of us." The point here is crucial. The serpent isn't a liar. It's a wisdom-bearing figure.
All right, this brings us to what might be the biggest misreading in the entire Bible, the so-called curse. The argument we're looking at today says this wasn't a punishment. Not at all. It was a divine appointment.
It all hinges on one little Hebrew phrase in Genesis 3:14. Cursed are you, Mikol, all livestock. For centuries, we've read this as cursed more than all livestock, like it was the worst of the worst. But in the context of ancient religious rankings, the word Mikol actually means above or set apart from.
So what does it mean to be appointed above all livestock? Well, in the Bible, what are livestock? They're the sacrificial animals, the lambs, the goats, the bulls. This means the serpent is being given a higher, more significant, symbolic job than the entire sacrificial system. This isn't a demotion, it's an elevation. And the whole eat dust thing? This isn't about biology. A few verses later, God literally defines what dust is. For dust you are, and to dust you shall return. Dust is the symbol of human mortality. So to eat dust is a symbolic divine role, to carry the burden of humanity's mortal condition.
Okay, with this new understanding, that bizarre quote from Jesus suddenly clicks into place. A clear, beautiful pattern of redemption starts to emerge, one that connects the garden, the wilderness, and the cross.
Just look at this progression. It's amazing. In Genesis, the serpent is appointed to bear the consequence of our mortality. Then, you fast forward to the book of Numbers. Israel is dying from snake bites. And what does God tell Moses to do? He says, lift up a bronze serpent on a pole for healing. And then, finally, in John's Gospel, Jesus says the Son of Man has to be lifted up in the exact same way. You see, it's not a contradiction, it's a divinely written storyline. The being assigned the role of bearing consequence in the garden is the very same symbol God uses for healing in the desert, which then becomes the prototype for the Messiah on the cross. But if there's any doubt left, the ancient Hebrew text has one final secret that's been encoded within it, a hidden layer that connects these two figures in a way that is just
unforgettable. And it all comes down to a number, 358. Now, on its own, it doesn't mean anything, but in the world of ancient Hebrew, numbers can unlock a whole new layer of meaning.
So, in the ancient Hebrew practice of gematria, letters also have numerical values. The Hebrew word for serpent, Nahash, adds up to 358. And the Hebrew word for Messiah, Mashiach, has the exact same numerical value. This isn't seen as a coincidence. It's understood as a divine signature, a code woven into the very fabric of the text, linking the serpent to its ultimate fulfillment. It's a total mic drop moment.
So, what does this all mean? I mean, where does this leave us? If this interpretation is right, it doesn't just change one little story. It changes the entire structure of the biblical narrative.
The takeaway here is just profound. The serpent wasn't the villain. It was the very first foreshadowing of the Messiah, what theologians call a Christ type. This means the story of redemption doesn't start with Abraham or Moses. It starts right there in the garden. Jesus, then, is the one who ultimately fulfills the serpent's original divine job, to bear the weight of our mortality and bring healing by being lifted up.
To put it as simply as possible, the serpent is the very first shadow of the cross, a symbol of redemption from page 1.
And that leaves us with one last thought to chew on. If the Bible's most famous villain was actually a symbol of redemption hiding in plain sight this whole time, what else have we all been taught to miss?